for my lovely subscribers. I'm here to make a little video about making maps, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. I'll just point out that this is a completely off the cuff, unscripted video, and I'm recording this up in my attic studio, affectionately known as the Loftwaffe, on a hot and steamy August day in 2024, with all those kind of things going on that happen around a town, aircraft flying over to nearby Shoreham Airport. There's some building going on out the back, and there's a guy with an angle grinder who seems to just turn up every few minutes to chop up another bit of concrete. And also, of course, we have seagulls. We're near the seaside, so what can I say? Seagulls may feature in this video, though I'm making no promises. Anyway, without further ado, let me get on with showing you a really simple introduction to how I go about making maps, and something to do with, you know, the purpose of making maps in the first place. And if you find this one interesting, then I might potentially do something a bit more detailed at some future date. So I hope that you enjoy this, and let's crack on with making a map. Well, hello everyone, and now we're getting started on how I go about making maps. And yes, the year is 2024, and you might be thinking to yourself, what are those strange objects on Henry's desk? The answer is, it's paper and a pencil. In fact, if I bring this across, you can probably see I've got quite a lot of pencils, and I've got more than this. And also, these are what are called lining pens, ranging from half or a 20th of a millimetre right up to nearly a millimetre in width. And you'll see how they get used later on. But my starting point for any map, maybe to some people's surprise, is always a pencil and a piece of paper. Now, a pencil, what flavour is this one? It's an F grade. If you know how pencils are made, they range in hardness from kind of many H's, like 5H, through to the typical ones that most people are used to, a school pencil, you might call it an HB, and then through the range of Bs, which are the much softer pencils, right up to 5 or 6 or even higher B, which means that every time you put the pencil on the paper, a lot more graphite comes out onto the paper. You might be able to hear the angle grinder I was warning you about in my introduction. There we are. He started up just in time for me to start talking. Anyway, I'm using an F, which is kind of right in the middle, really, between the H's and the B's. And it's just a softness that I like for my initial kind of sketching. And hopefully it will be soft enough for you to be able to see what I'm doing on the paper. I'll just say something about the paper. Any paper will do, but at this stage I would recommend using something quite cheap and simple. And in fact, there's a very lightweight paper you can buy in pads from any good stationers called layout paper, which is very, very lightweight. It's about 50 grams per square metre coating or less, if you understand weights of paper. But you can see it's very crackly. It's not quite onion paper, but very, very lightweight. One of the benefits is, I don't know if you can see here, it's semi-transparent, translucent. You can see through it. Not quite as much as if it was tracing paper, if you're old enough to remember tracing paper. I said tracing paper to my godson the other day, and he said, "What? What's that?" So, tracing paper is clearly, sadly, falling out of use. But this is layout paper, often used by graphic designers. And one of the benefits is you can, if you're doing some sort of design work, you can do something on one sheet and then kind of line it up with something else on another sheet. Very useful stuff. And I just find that for my very initial sketches for maps, just a simple pencil and a piece of lightweight paper like this is really good. But use whatever you want, you know. But The first question, the first reason I'm using a reasonably large piece of paper, this is A3 size, as opposed to that would be A4. Okay. Well, the reason is because I find that if I use A4 paper, the temptation is always to try and go right to the edge. And you can get away with that if you know what you're doing. And particularly maybe if you're just designing an island. But I think it's a better idea most of the time to use a larger piece of paper. And you could go larger than this if you wanted, A2 or whatever. But I've used A3 partly because it fits on this little bit of desk space I've managed to clear out for this demonstration. And also because we're going to be starting in the middle. Okay, my advice is always to start in the middle. Now, that then gives you plenty of space to expand outwards, to add bits on, and so on and so forth. Okay, first question, why are we making this map? Let's say, okay, I'm just going to use a typical example. I mean, fantasy maps for fantasy novels are absolutely stock in trade, aren't they? If you're writing a fantasy novel, readers kind of expect that they want a glimpse of your world building, and so having a map perhaps right at the front of the book, you know, like Tolkien did. This is another reason why having a map right at the front of the book can be really helpful for people to get their bearings when you're writing about lots of strange places with made up names and that kind of stuff. It really helps to have some kind of map so people, if necessary, can go, oh, hang on a minute, where was that? And refer back to the map that you've created. Another useful reason would be if you're writing either a history book or a historical novel that's set in a particular place where there's a particular set of events that flow from one place to another. Having a map to help the setting can really help. And I happen to straddle those things because because of my background, which is to do with wargaming and military history and that kind of stuff. I've created huge numbers of maps. Maps of particular towns, maps for battles if there's a battle happening, if you're a historian writing about D-Day, that kind of thing. Having a map is always a useful thing. But we're going to say today that we are just going to make stuff up as if it were a fantasy map. Now, you can do your map after having done some of your writing about your fantasy setting, or you can use a map as a starting point, as a way of generating ideas for the flow of your story, so that your story will fit into the geography that you create, geography and geology. Now, I'm going to assume for today this is going to be an Earth-like kind of planet, right? And that it is not some weird science fiction-y place where all the laws of nature are completely different, where there may be all sorts of weird chemicals and seas of blood or whatever it is. Okay, I'm going to assume this is an Earth-like setting. Okay, now, is this going to be a little place we want to create? Is it going to be a single country? Is it going to be an entire continent? Well, I'm known for creating worlds and continents, and that's a huge undertaking. So let's assume for today that we're just going to create some kind of country or nation or area, geographical area, that is going to be the setting for your novel. Okay, let's assume it's a novel. By the way, these bits of blue tack are simply to prevent me from turning the paper so much that you can't see it. All right, so I'm hoping that these little blobs of blue tack will help me to keep things. Oops, sorry, I've bashed the tripod there. Very cramped space here. Anyway, let's have a go. So, first of all, let's think about the geology of this place. Okay, so there's various ways that you can randomly decide the geology of your place, and that includes things like rolling dice or drawing cards. and I've written a whole chapter in a big book that I wrote all about systems for helping you to generate the geology of your place. But let's just say, okay, in this place we've got, it's a fantasy setting, there's got to be a range of mountains somewhere. So imagine that at some point in the past of this planet, the forces of gravity and volcanic activity have forced up various areas of ground to enormous heights and left others kind of more flat. So let's just, and this is why, just very lightly with this F pencil, I'm going to imagine that somewhere up the north of this country, I'm going to say that this is kind of mountainous area here. Let's have, shall we have a pass? Okay, so you can, I will be inking this over in more detail later, but there we go. I'm just doing rough areas to say that up north there. In fact, let's make it more interesting. Let's say that there's another bit of mountainous area there, perhaps some more mountainous area over here, some mountainous area over here, and some foothills. Okay, so we've got some slightly lower areas around here, okay, and then in the south of the country it's more flat. And in fact, let's go as far as to say maybe there's a coastline down here. Should we say there's a bit of a coastline? Okay, so let's say, and this is where I'm just again going to, all I do is I let my hand get kind of a bit twitchy when I'm drawing coastlines, something like this. Okay, and I may well do some longer kind of inlety bits that could of course be the estuary of a river. So I'm just saying there's a bit of a coastline down there, okay, and there may be islands, that kind of stuff, right? Now it makes sense of course that where you've got mountains and where you've got a coastline, there's probably going to be some rivers running from the mountains down to the coast. And this is the next kind of thing I would indicate, is that, let's say there's probably going to be quite a big river just meandering is the word, isn't it? Meandering its way down to the coast here, and another river down. This is obviously valley areas here. So from this mountainous area, we've got another big river wending its way down to that one, let's say. Let's have, again, from further over here, let's have another river. Okay, heading down here somewhere. And yes, I'm in a mood for another river, maybe coming off in this sort of direction more and heading off over in that direction to the coast, maybe down there somewhere. Okay, now there's logic here. By just in this little thing we've done here, you can imagine that basically this bit of planet country would be effectively, it's tilted a bit like that. If I lift up the far edge of the paper, why do I say that? Because all the rivers are running to the sea down here. So this is high altitude up there, low altitude down here, and the sea, of course. Okay, maybe, we put in a compass if you like. You're probably going to say, oh yes, that's probably northish up there, and that's probably southish, or whatever equivalence you have in your fantasy setting. Okay, so having established highlands, lowlands, maybe there's some tributaries going into this big river as well, so that's entirely possible that there would be a tributary there. I've got off these foothills there, maybe a tributary here, maybe another tributary here, maybe from this side of the foothills there's a tributary going in there. How about a little tributary coming in here? And maybe off those foothills, another tributary there. Okay. So every time you add a major geographical feature like this, you're sculpting your landscape. So where the rivers are, obviously they run from high ground to low ground, and those are going to be valleys. Obviously, because that's what you get around rivers. And there may even be, where it's flat down here, there may be floodplains, that kind of thing. Okay, so That's our basics. There's something else you've got to decide. Okay, you've got some mountainous areas and some hilly areas and some rivers and a coastline. What's your climate like? Are we talking about somewhere that's kind of Arctic cold? Are we talking about somewhere that's steamy, jungly hot? Are we talking somewhere that's maybe relatively arid and desert-like? Think, I don't know, southern Spain. Or are we thinking somewhere sort of more temperate, like, well, I live in Sussex. And funnily enough, here we are, I've just, perhaps subconsciously, have I just reproduced the South Downs, what with some hills and some rivers running from hills down to a coastline, right? There we go. It's entirely possible. West Sussex, East Sussex, who knows? But there's another question. So you've got the climate. Where on your globe is this? Is this a temperate zone? Is this up on a high plateau? Could it be that this coastline is all cliffs that are like thousands of feet high? So actually we've said this is flat, but that flat land could still be several hundred or thousand feet above sea level. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? So you get down to the coastline and there's these massive cliffs plunging down into the sea. Or it could be relatively low lying, so that, you know, basically the tide's washing in and out of this coastline constantly, potentially eroding it. The next question, having decided what kind of zone this is on your planet, what climate zone it is what scale are we talking about? So here's a ruler marked in, let's say that's centimetres. Obviously, anyone who knows paper sizes knows that A2 paper, that's 420 millimetres by 297 millimetres. If you think in terms of scale, you could say, okay, if this is a small place, well, from north to south of our map could be, let's say, 29.7 miles. On the other hand, it could be 297 miles or 2,970 miles. Okay, and this is where I warn you that if you make a mistake on scale, like I did on something I did a couple of years ago, but I went with it just for a laugh, you could find that you've created an entire continent rather than just a country, let alone a county. Now, obviously, if this is just a county-sized area, and I'm talking about UK county size, saying from north to south is 29, 30 miles by, say, 42 miles across, that's perfectly reasonable for a modest-sized county. If it's a country, saying it's 297 miles by 420 miles, that's okay. That's something, what, like Belgium-ish? That kind of size, I suppose. Places like France and Spain are big countries, so they would be probably 2 or 3 or even 4 times the size of that. And obviously something like Russia or the USA, much, much bigger than that. But let's just say, roughly, we're going to say here that, okay, I'm going to say this is a country, and therefore our 297 millimetres, so that is 297 miles by 420 miles across. Okay, so what that means is, in this area now, these mountain ranges and so forth, that kind of makes sense. So we're looking like highland areas with you know, some moorland areas, maybe if we're thinking of the UK, that kind of thing. Okay, and a coastline that's a, you know, few hundred miles long. And obviously you have the option of saying, well, actually I want this to be an island, so you could have a coastline going the whole way around. And I've done that many, many times. But let's just say, here we are, it's a country with neighbouring countries, and it makes sense, if we're talking about a fantasy map, that things like rivers and mountain ranges are obvious natural borders. So we would say, and I'll put in a border symbol roughly along here, that this river over here, whatever it is, if I put a kind of a dashy line along kind of parallel with that, like so, and this is just very rough. Remember, if we're using pencils, remember these things, rubbers, erasers, You can always use that if you want to change it, but I'm just going with this. So that would be a natural border along that river there, and there's probably another natural border along this river here. Okay, and we're assuming that these are kind of major rivers till we get to the coast, and then probably this mountainous barrier is going to be some other kind of border, and I'm just going to, you know, following sort of what we would assume would be the center of these mountain ranges, okay, where the highest peaks would be. That would be your kind of natural barrier. So you can see the dotted line I've just done forms the actual outline of our as yet unnamed country. Okay, so what I'm going to do is now I'm going to way of representing mountainous areas. It's not seen very much these days because now we're used to the notion of contours. Okay, and if we were doing a very atlas style map, then yes, we would use contours, but there's a number of ways of representing mountains in fantasy kind of maps. One way is to actually kind of draw little mountains in profile and then sort of shade one side, a bit like that. So you would decide that, oh yeah, the sun's coming from up here somewhere, so there's your mountain with a pointy bit at the top. Okay, and then you would draw like a series of mountains kind of like that, overlapping, shading them to give the impression of a range of hills in profile. And that's fine, and in a more detailed discussion I would talk something about that and show you precisely how you can go about doing that, because nowadays with computer software there's all kind of cheap ways of doing that. What I like to do is what's now considered a rather old-fashioned form of indicating mountains, which is called using flesh, and that's F-L-E grav, C-H-E-S for the plural, flesh, which are basically, it comes from the French word for arrows, I believe. And so we've got this mountainous area here. I'm not going to do the whole map, but just to give you an indication. So we start at the bottom end, and it's almost like giving that area eyelashes. Okay, and the idea is you press hard when you start, and then your pressure eases off as you get to the kind of more pointy end, and so you come in and out to indicate kind of valleys and that kind of thing. Okay, and if I was going to get really technical, the length of the flesh indicates that how gradual the slope is. So something with a really long flesh like that indicates a relatively gentle slope. Okay, where's it go? Whereas if you come in and do tighter, shorter ones, that indicates that it's more steep. Okay, so you can get quite subtle in the way that you represent. So for example, we're coming up to that river here. Let's say that the valley that the river flows through up there is quite steep. All right, so it's quite a torrent, so you would put them close together and short like that. Okay, and then gradually ease them out again. So that gives you the outline of the lowest contour effectively. So you say, okay, up to about, let's stick with feet, 500 feet, something like that, which is whatever that is in meters, 167 meters. So then again, to show the next layer up, you just do it again. And so you can also see that, you know, whilst low down the ground might be a gradual slope, higher up it might not be so gradual. And also the gap between the layers of flesh indicates how steep it is. So again, let's say the source of that river, I'm going to make that a really quite steep bit of ground, and then gradually it eases out over to the eastern side where the slope is more gradual, like so. Let's go back up to the north and say, okay. And you know, if you wanted to get really fancy about it, there's ways you can indicate plateau and all that kind of thing. But let's just say I'm just indicating, okay, that this range of mountains might be, say, goes up to about 1,500 feet, something like that. So what I want now is a couple of summits. So in here, I'm just going to do a couple of smaller ones, because that would make sense. We drew that rough borderline earlier, and so connecting the summits would be a good way of indicating a border. And let's have one here. All right, so that's, and obviously if you want to, you could put a little dot or a triangle symbol. So what we've actually got is what's called a saddle. So you've got two very high mountain peaks and a lower pass between them, which kind of follows the line of the river. That makes sense. So that's how you can do a mountain. Now obviously I've not got time at the moment to do all of these, and obviously down here where we've got the foothills, we would expect those to be lower, so maybe only one level of these flesh, and probably I would expect them to be gentler slopes. Okay. But immediately you're getting this representation of how steep the slopes are, the valleys between them, that kind of thing. And also it makes sense of your river. So now if I get, this is where these pens come in, I'm just going to make a radical decision with this pen about the course of this river. Okay, I'm going to have its source further up. Okay, so we've got a nice wiggly waggly river coming down here. And then as it gets to the coast, actually, so I'm going to draw that bit of coast like so. And we're going to say this has got sort of an estuary. So here I'm going to make it widen out. So I'm now drawing the two banks. Okay, so can you see how it widens out as it hits the sea? And okay, again, we've got these coming down and joining that main river like this. Like so. Then it makes sense that where those rivers have joined, I'm going to thicken up the river because it's got more water flowing in it now. Okay. So for this bit of the river, I'm going to use a thicker pen till it hits the sea. If you wanted to go completely bonkers, you'd say, well, hang on a minute, there's a second river joining, so make this bit even thicker. So let's do that. But I'm doing this just to show you how your creation, the place you're creating, has a logic to it, a geological logic, a geographic logic. Okay. Obviously, once I've done everything else, I would go over all these flesh probably with one of my more slender pens. So if I start doing kind of the inking in, because remember, with my eraser, I can go over and rub out all those pencil lines afterwards. And you might say, well, I want to do everything in pencil first and then go over and, you know, make my firm decisions about what to ink in. And that's fair enough. I'm just trying to save time here, okay? So at the moment we've got a furry, looks like one of those things we studied in biology at high school, wasn't it? Was it not an amoeba, but something like that, with lots of frilly things running outside, propelling it along. So, high ground, rivers. Now, of course, if your country is arid, then these rivers may not actually contain water all the time. They may be, I think the Spanish and Mexican people call them arroyo, something. Sorry, I'm pronouncing it totally wrong. Arroyo, or something like that. You'll correct me. Go ahead. But it's where it's a dried up riverbed, known in Arabic as a wadi. I can pronounce that. Okay, so it's only when it rains, perhaps, and the water comes tumbling down from the mountains that they actually fill up with water. If it's a cold, really cold place, these might be the roots of glaciers, okay, that have carved out over millions of years, and they're still full of ice. Sadly, not enough left on our planet, are there? But there you are. So again, your choices about the climate of the place you're creating make a difference to what these things actually represent. And of course, it could well be, here we are, we've created these mountains. If it's a very cold Arctic place, okay, that might be 1,500 feet or 1,500 meters of actual terrain, but it might be covered in an extra 100, 200, 500,000 feet of ice and snow. Okay? So there's all those things you can think about, but that's a simple way of just creating some basic geography. Now, on top of that, we have to think, okay, and I'm just going to ink in a bit more of my coastline here, okay? I'm just making some more bold decisions about saying, yeah, that'll do. And at the end of the day, like so many things in life, that's what you have to do, isn't it? I'm going to say there's another estuary going up there. You just have to go, do you know what? That'll do. Because you can always change it later, right? So here's coastline. Like so. And because I've done this before, the kind of thing I like to do is, oh, there's going to be an island there. I just decided there's going to be an island there and an island there. Oh, quite a big island here. Little island there. How about a little chain of islands? Okay. And where else looks like this should have an island. I think there's, because of erosion, but there's a big lump of harder rock left, which has created an island there with an interesting channel. Okay. Other things, of course, these could be mountains because of tectonic movement. They could be volcanic mountains. Okay. So that would, shall we just for a laugh, we'll say, okay, over here, this mountain was volcanic. So it's got long, gradual sides. Okay. To create that classic kind of cone shape that a volcano would have. It would have long, gradual sides at the bottom, gradually getting more and more steep around the crater. And even another set of flesh inside that, short and very steep, and in fact there I would draw an edge for the crater. Okay, and where there's been a volcanic explosion, you know, or volcanic activity, you might also have, you know, lava flows heading out, all sorts of interesting stuff, sulfur beds and so on. Right, let's concentrate. I'm just going to concentrate on this bit of this country in the last, you know, bit of this video. Excuse me, I must have a slurp of water. This being the case, we can see big rivers, water. So areas around the river will be more fertile. Okay? So it's entirely possible that, perhaps not right up in the mountains, but there's likely to be settlements around the gentler hills, near the rivers, okay? And I'm just roughly sketching in where most of the habitations might be, and then along the coast. Why? Because, of course, around your rivers, that's where you can get agriculture. So people are more likely to be living in and around, and even on, the rivers and near the coast. Near the coast because, of course, fish. So people can catch fish and survive near the river. People can have agriculture near the rivers, okay? So that's worth bearing in mind. Other things, however, up in mountains, what do we often get? We often get forests. So I'm going to say just randomly on the slopes of this forest, and I'm just using little tree symbols, okay? I'm just putting in some little tree symbols like this. To indicate wooded slopes, or you might have more kind of pine foresty things. So there we go, just the classic kind of Christmas tree shape. And these are just rough at the moment, because obviously if you're going to take this eventually into a computer program, you can get as fancy as you like. But just for the moment, let's just do a few kind of Christmas tree symbols and some wooded symbols here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a dotted line around the edge of the woods and forests, okay, just to indicate where they kind of peter out and become, you know, scrubland or heathland, that kind of stuff. But within those confines, it's pretty dense forest. And again, down here, probably, I'm going to use my pencil sharpener, excuse me. The joys of an electric pencil sharpener, ladies and gentlemen. There we go, and some more trees. We're going to say this is nice and wooded here, forested. Think Sherwood forests rather than just kind of your little wood where you go and walk your dog. Okay, so again, that's nicely forested. And of course, yes, you do get people living in and around woods and forests, and they're a source of timber. So we're already starting to build an economy for our country, okay? So looking at this already, nice coastline, major river, tributaries, okay? And it's quite a wide estuary down here, and according to our scale, you know, that's about 30 or 40 miles from there to there, okay? So there could be all kinds of things going on there, fishing, industry, trade. Where are there likely to be cities or, you know, major conurbations? The confluence of rivers. I'm going to put just a square in there to indicate a city. Entirely likely that there's going to be another city there. Entirely likely there's going to be some sort of city at the head of the estuary. There might be one down at the mouth of the estuary. I quite like the idea of having a city that spreads from, this is fantasy, remember, that's both on the coast and on the island. That's interesting, isn't it? Like the Dardanelles, something like that. So there we are, just bunging in randomly a few cities. Okay, where else? Okay, there might be one higher up the river because, and let's think about this. What else do you find in mountains? You tend to find ore and precious metals and tin and iron and coal and all those things. Or so the materials needed for even early industry. So even if it's before in the time before coal and steam and that kind of stuff, you needed timber to keep blacksmiths' forges going. So obviously having a town or city not too far from a forest within easy reach of the traders who might bring lumber down from the forest, that's a really good thing. Also, it's a river, so there's going to be fish and that kind of stuff. There's going to be fertile ground. Particularly, remember the volcano? Volcanoes are fantastic. Volcanic soil is extremely fertile. So it's entirely possible that the area over here, you know, spreading out from where this has had eruptions in the past, the soil there could be incredibly fertile. So this area of the map could be renowned for its crops, let's say. Whereas this area of the map could be renowned for its carpentry and that sort of thing. This area of the map, fishing, but also trade, because there's going to be ships coming in and going out. Okay? So a city like this or this, or the mouth of the estuary, could be where you have docks and lots of kind of industry and trade routes starting from here. And of course, having already decided there's a few cities, obviously these, in the early days, very handy, connected by the rivers, okay? But also there's going to be some towns and, you know, let's just say towns are circles rather than squares. So there's probably likely to be other towns, maybe even one up on the edge of the hills there. Certainly more along the coast and that kind of thing. Maybe even on islands. There's going to be towns, okay? And obviously you can go crazy doing as many as you like up in the mountains. Some surrounded by farmland, crops out here, okay? So you can just start dotting towns around wherever you think they need to be, okay? Remember, there's a river there. So, great, these are connected by rivers, but these are going to be connected by roads. So if we do a dashed line to indicate roads, and where a road crosses a river, you're going to have a bridge, or at least a ford, okay? And these major cities may have decided that, oh, everything having to go by river is a bit slow, so they may also have a road, and it's often the case, you don't have to travel far to see this, major roads running alongside rivers. Then obviously major places are going to have roads fanning out from them. And before you know it, you've got an interconnected road system. Okay? And obviously, these are trade routes. Sometimes the route might be direct, but if terrain gets in the way, the road may swing out to avoid some of the terrain. Okay? Like up in the mountain, your road quite obviously might have a number of, you know, hairpin bends like that. But again, you can see, okay, towns, road crossing river, therefore bridge. Okay? Most of these roads will probably be quite good quality, but it depends then on what kind of civilization have you got. Is this a primitive civilization, or are we talking, you know, the Romans here, who love building roads, straight ones at that, okay? So things are going to be happening along roads. Sometimes a road might just come down and there might be a junction with a very tiny town or village or whatever. Think of, on these roads, maybe there are tolls to be paid. You don't have to read much history to hear about, you know, it's not just a modern thing that we have toll roads. They've existed for a very, very, very long time. So you've got already this civilization emerging with this kind of green zone around the rivers, fertile ground, fishing communities, shipbuilding communities, boat building communities, communities producing lumber and charcoal, of course, which is used for early industry. Suddenly, just from this little sketch map that I've banged together this afternoon, look at the potential that's already emerging for the background for your story, and how it in itself can create stories. Because again, just think, okay, we just plopped on the map. We plopped City 1 and City 2 relatively close together. What's that? 20 miles or there or so? Thereabouts. Along this major river. And what if those two communities started arguing about something like, I don't know, fishing rights, or this community here wanted to do something with its industry and decided it wanted to dam or divert the river. Well, they're probably not going to be very happy about that. So immediately you've got the basis for a story, a conflict. Other things, obviously, where you've got these mountainous zones or volcanoes or whatever, wow, this is great stuff for epic adventure for your hero travelling up into the mountains to kill the nasty beastie that has been attacking the miners or whatever. Okay? You've got people taking long journeys because back in the day, people often didn't really travel outside their own village, or certainly not very far. So a journey from one town here to, say, one of the major cities would be a major undertaking, or pilgrimage, something of that kind. Here we are, we've got this city on the estuary here. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's a very important place indeed. Maybe it's even like Istanbul, it's spread across both sides of that river there. It's expanding outwards. Then, of course, you've got the question of how far advanced is your civilization again? So are these places just open towns that anyone can wander in and out of? Or have they got some kind of powerful leader who has fortified the city in one way or another? I'm drawing kind of a star shape around this, which is a much later development. The star-shaped fortress is from the kind of 17th century, 16th century onwards. But imagine that they've built big fortified walls with towers, castle towers and that kind of stuff. Suddenly you've got a Troy on your hands, that kind of stuff. And obviously then you have a centre of power, and where you've got a centre of power, someone else is probably going to be jealous of that centre of power. So, having done the pencil sketching and come up with some basic ideas and decided, okay, I'm happy with that as my central geography, and made any corrections using one of these erasers if you need to, that's when I would then, as I say, go over with the pen and start inking in all the major features. Okay. And then you've got the geography of your country, and that in itself starts inspiring ideas for story. Obviously, you can come back and tweak it whenever you like. It's yours. Then, of course, you might have things like, well, what am I going to call this place? I don't know. How you go about naming places is an art form all in itself. You can base it on real country names and just tweak them a bit. So, let's say, we were saying earlier that this is looking like a slightly mad version of the South Downs in Sussex. So, how about we call this, I don't know, Sudonia, right? So there's our country name, Sudonia. And then you just need to come up with names for your towns. So the people living in Sudonia would be the Sudanese, let's say. And maybe the Sudanese have different kind of clans or ethnic groups within them. So you might want to say, well, okay, I'm going to divide up this country into regions. So let's say, here's a classic example. If I get a thicker pencil, let me get a thicker pencil, 4B in fact. So let's say that here, this bit of the country here, all right, and I'm going to do some hash marks over it. That's one region with one particular ethnic group. Then you've got another region here, this side of this river, which might have another ethnic group. And down here, another group. And over here, a bigger ethnic group. You might decide that parts of your country, like around the rivers would be logical, or along the coast, are much more densely populated than other areas. You could say, okay, this part of the map is a temperate climate, very nice, almost British, but over here, for whatever reason, it's more desert-like, more arid, more bleak, okay? Now, that's makes more sense where your scale might be continental. So instead of 297 miles, that's 2,970 by 4,200, right? That's big. And over those sort of spaces, you would expect there to be quite dramatic changes. Whereas if this is just a county, it's like, I think East and West Sussex have got pretty much the same climate. Sometimes, although, strangely enough, even here, our South Downs, I've seen this so many times where it's sunny here in Brighton and Hove and raining like Billio up in Haywards Heath, the other side of the South Downs, or vice versa. They've got blistering sunshine at Gatwick Airport and we've all got our umbrellas up. So even in a relatively small enclave, you can have climate variations. But anyway, that's the idea, folks. That's how I get started. And once I've done all this, narrowing things down, penciled everything in, then gone over with ink, it's at that point I would then scan it into Adobe Photoshop or Affinity Photo or photo manipulation software of your choice and start work on the computer, refining everything, putting in place names and that kind of stuff and building up a lot of layers. If you would like to see that, well, that's something I will certainly do for potentially for paid subscribers. It's a lot of work for me to do that, but I would be happy to do that if you're one of my paid subscribers at some point. So let me know, or vote with your wallets, folks, if you want to see more about map making in much more detail and how to manipulate what I've done here on the computer and turn it into something that, wow, that looks like a map you could buy in a shop. I'm more than happy to do that. I'm also going to drop in some images into the end of this video of other maps, what I have done, so you can see the kind of thing that I've achieved in the past. I've shown you a couple, but I'll do a few more kind of pop-ups of detailed maps so you can see. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful. I hope it's given you some ideas. Or, you know, if you're just a visitor to Substack, I hope it's given you an insight into how this kind of thing is done. I would be delighted to hear if you got yourself a pad of paper and a pencil and got scribbling and show me the results, right? No excuses. It does nothing to do with being good at art or not. It's just a matter of just go on, have a play. And there are other ways of generating terrain ideas. If you struggle to come up with the logic yourself, just start by, you know, rolling a dice. If you divide it up into squares, if you roll a 6, there's a city. Okay. If you're thinking about where do you want to put forest, roll a 5 or 6 on a dice, and there'll be a forest in that square. Okay. Really simple. Have fun doing it. Or a pack of cards. Okay. A king or the ace means it's the capital city. All right. Any sorts of ways of doing it. Have fun. Thanks for watching. This has probably been much longer than you were expecting, longer than I was expecting, but there's so much to cram in. I can't really make it any shorter than this. So I hope you've stuck with me. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks very much for watching.